I've always loved hiking. Ever since I was a kid, I'd been drawn to the woods, the mountains, the idea of stepping away from roads and buildings and just walking into nature. Over the years, I learned how important it was to stick to the trails. My dad had drilled that into me early. If you can't see the sun, you'll walk in circles. People die every year because they think they can handle going just a little bit off the trail to explore or take a shortcut or even just to pee. Still, even knowing that, I never thought I'd be one of the people at risk. It was a clear spring morning when I set out for my hike. I had taken time off work for a solo trip, driving up to a national park I'd never been to before. The place was famous for its winding forest trails, its deep woods, and its rugged beauty. I was excited but also a little cautious. I had researched the area, downloaded maps to my phone, packed snacks, water, a first aid kit, and a backup battery. I thought I was ready. The trail I picked was about 10 miles long, a loop that led deep into the forest, climbed a ridge, and then curved back to the trailhead. The weather was perfect, cool, crisp air, birds singing, the smell of damp earth under my boots. I made good time at first, enjoying the quiet, stopping every so often to take photos or just breathe it all in. About halfway through, I realized I needed to pee. Now, I knew the rule: don't wander off the trail. But there weren't any people around, and I didn't feel like squatting right next to the path in case someone came by. I spotted a little dip between some trees just a short way off, maybe 20 feet. I thought, no big deal, I'll just hop over there, take care of business, and hop right back. It's amazing how fast things can go wrong. I stepped off the trail, weaving through some brush, picking my way carefully so I wouldn't trip or get scratched up. When I finished and turned to head back, I froze. I couldn't see the trail. It had been right behind me. I was sure I hadn't gone far, but now all I saw were trees. Tall, dense trees in every direction. The undergrowth looked the same everywhere. There was no clear path, no packed dirt line, no sign of where I had come from. I told myself to stay calm. I turned slowly, looking for landmarks. A log, a rock, anything I recognized, but everything blurred together. My heart started to pound. I forced myself to take a deep breath, telling myself to retrace my steps carefully. I turned the way I thought I had come, walking slowly, eyes scanning the ground. But after a few minutes, the trail still wasn't there. I stopped again, feeling sweat break out on my back. It wasn't even hot, but I was sweating. I checked my phone, opening the GPS map, but in the thick woods, the location dot bounced around uselessly, pointing in all directions. I couldn't tell which way was correct. I started walking faster, convinced the trail had to be just over the next rise, just past the next group of trees. But the woods stretched on and on, thick trunks and tangled underbrush. No trail, no signs, no markers. I remembered the thing about the sun. If you can't see the sun, you can't keep a straight line. You start to curve even when you think you're walking straight. You end up moving in loops, crossing your own path over and over. I forced myself to stop again. I drank some water, trying to slow my racing thoughts. I had food and water. I wasn't injured. It wasn't night yet. I had time to figure this out. I tried the GPS again, but the thick forest cover made it useless. The trail map I had on my phone only helped if I knew where I was, which I didn't. I decided to pick one direction and stick to it, hoping it would eventually bring me back to the trail or to a road or river. I chose what looked like the downhill slope, thinking it might lead to the valley where the main trail ran. I walked for what felt like an hour. My legs were getting tired, and I was starting to feel shaky. I kept checking the time on my phone, watching the afternoon slip away. The forest around me grew denser, the ground wetter and softer. I realized I was following a small animal trail, not a human one, narrow, winding, sometimes disappearing under fallen branches. I tried to stay positive. I kept walking, eyes alert, heart pounding. Every so often I thought I heard something, a distant voice, the sound of water. But when I stopped to listen, there was nothing but the wind in the trees and the distant call of birds. After another long stretch, I finally stumbled onto something that made my heart leap. An old, weathered trail marker nailed to a tree. It was faded, almost illegible, but it meant people came through here. I followed the faint line of the trail, forcing myself to stay calm, focusing on each step. The ground was uneven, and I slipped several times, catching myself on roots and branches. I was dirty, scratched, and exhausted, but I kept moving. As the sun dipped lower, shafts of golden light started breaking through the trees, and I felt a surge of hope. I adjusted my course toward the light, hoping it would lead me to a clearing or higher ground. Finally, just as the last light was fading, I broke out of the trees onto a rough gravel path. I almost cried with relief. I followed the path, limping a little now, until I saw a wooden sign pointing toward the trailhead. The sign was weathered but solid, and the arrow pointed downhill. I kept moving, driven by the thought of getting back to my car, back to safety. The sky was turning deep blue above me, the first stars appearing. I fumbled for my headlamp, grateful I had packed it. By the time I reached the trailhead, it was fully dark. My car was the only one left in the small lot. I sank onto the hood for a moment, shaking, breathing hard, feeling the weight of the fear that had been riding me all afternoon. I sat there for a long time, sipping water, eating the last of my snacks, letting the realization sink in. I had been incredibly lucky. If I hadn't found that old trail marker, if I had kept wandering in circles, if night had fallen while I was still lost, things could have ended very differently. When I finally drove away, the empty road winding through the dark forest, I felt both relieved and humbled. I had thought I was prepared. I had thought I was smart enough, experienced enough. But nature doesn't care about that. It's terrifyingly easy to get lost, to go from confident to desperate in a matter of hours. All it takes is one small mistake. Stepping off the trail just for a moment, underestimating how easy it is to lose your sense of direction when you can't see the sun. That night, back at the small cabin I had rented, I took the longest, hottest shower of my life. I sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing, still shaking a little inside. The next day, I went back home, cutting the trip short. I told my family and friends the story, laughing a little to play down how bad it had felt, but inside I knew I'd been scared, really scared. I still hike, I still love the woods, but now I carry a paper map, a compass, a whistle, extra water, and an emergency blanket. I tell people where I'm going and when I expect to be back. I stick to the trail, because if you can't see the sun, you walk in circles. And sometimes circles can kill you. That's not a fairy tale. That's just the truth. I've been hiking for years. Long trails, short trails, off trail, I've done them all. And over time, I've picked up little habits, little tricks, things you don't think about when you first start out, but that make a big difference the more time you spend in the wild. One of those is flagging. You can buy rolls of flagging tape at any outdoor store or even hardware stores, bright pink, orange, or yellow strips on a roll. You tear a piece, tie it to a branch, and keep moving. When I go off trail for any reason, whether it's to explore a side route, check out a viewpoint, or even take a shortcut, I walk slow and flag trees as I go. Then, on the way back, I follow the flags, collect them, and make sure I leave no trace behind. It's a simple system, and it's saved me more times than I can count. Last fall, I took a solo trip up into the mountains for a long weekend. I had 3 days to myself, no deadlines, no phone calls, no noise. I picked a remote area with a few established trails and plenty of side country to explore. I wasn't planning to camp overnight, just do long day hikes and return to my rental cabin each evening. On the second day, I woke up early, made coffee, packed my gear, water, snacks, first aid, map, compass, headlamp, rain jacket, and of course, a roll of flagging tape, and set off. The trail I chose led deep into the woods, climbing steadily along a ridgeline. The sky was clear, the air crisp with the first bite of autumn. Leaves crunched underfoot, and the smell of pine and damp earth filled the air. I moved at a steady pace, stopping here and there to catch my breath or admire the view. About 3 hours in, I came to a fork. The main trail kept climbing, but to the right, I saw what looked like an old logging road, mostly overgrown, barely a path. I checked my map, but it didn't show much detail in that area. Just some faded contour lines and a dotted line that might have been an old route. Curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow the overgrown road for a bit, just to see where it led. Before stepping off the main trail, I pulled out my roll of flagging tape. I tore off a strip and tied it to a low-hanging branch at the junction. Then I tore a few more, sticking them in my pocket for easy access. As I walked, I tied a new piece to a branch or bush every few minutes, making sure each one was visible from the last. The old road curved through the trees, the ground soft and uneven, littered with fallen branches. I walked carefully, alert to my surroundings, keeping an eye out for anything interesting. I wasn't worried about getting lost. That's why I carried flagging. About an hour in, the road petered out entirely, swallowed by the forest. But I'd spotted something up ahead that kept me going, a rocky outcrop, rising above the trees. I thought it might offer a good view of the valley below. I kept flagging as I went, moving more slowly now, picking my way through thick undergrowth. Reaching the outcrop was harder than I expected. The slope was steeper, the ground loose underfoot. I had to scramble up the last section, using my hands to pull myself over rough rocks and tree roots. But the view was worth it. From the top, I could see the whole valley spread out below, a patchwork of green and gold, the river winding through it, the distant peaks rising beyond. I stood there for a while, drinking water, eating a granola bar, feeling the cool breeze on my face. When I was ready to head back, I turned to retrace my steps. That's when things got tricky. The slope I'd scrambled up looked different from above. The rocks and roots blended together, and the trees all looked the same. I scanned the area for my flagging, but I couldn't see any of the strips I'd tied. I felt a flicker of unease. I started down slowly, trying to follow what I thought was the same path. The ground was slippery, the undergrowth dense. I slipped a couple of times, cursing under my breath. At the bottom, I paused, looking around carefully. Still no sign of my flagging. I walked a little further, thinking maybe I drifted off to the side. Still nothing. The unease grew. I pulled out my compass, checked my bearings, tried to orient myself. According to the map, the main trail should be west of where I was. I set a heading and started walking slowly, scanning the trees for any flash of pink or orange. But the forest closed in around me. The undergrowth thickened, the trees grew taller, the ground became marshy. I realized I was heading into a low, wet area, not what I remembered coming through. I stopped again, took a deep breath, forced myself to think. This was exactly why I flagged. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost the trail of my own markers. I needed to backtrack carefully, not charge ahead blindly. I turned, following my own footprints as best I could, moving slowly, eyes sharp for any glimpse of the flagging tape. Finally, after what felt like forever, I spotted a faint flash of pink on a branch. Relief flooded through me. I hurried toward it, slowing down only when I remembered how easy it was to slip and fall in the undergrowth. I reached the flagged branch, then traced my way back through the markers, collecting each one as I went. The system worked. I had a breadcrumb trail leading me home. Still, by the time I reached the main trail again, I was shaken. I hadn't been truly lost, but I'd been close. If I hadn't been flagging, I might have wandered for hours, maybe even until dark. Back on solid ground, I took a long drink of water, ate another snack, and sat for a few minutes to steady my nerves. My legs were scraped up, my arms scratched, and I was more tired than I expected, but I was safe. I followed the main trail back toward the trailhead, moving more slowly now, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. By the time I reached the parking lot, the light was fading, and a cool breeze had picked up. I sat on the bumper of my car for a while, just breathing, feeling the solid earth under my feet, the familiar weight of my pack on my back. I thought about how easy it was to let curiosity lead you a little too far, how even a small side adventure could turn into a problem if you weren't careful. That night, back at the cabin, I cleaned up, made a hot meal, and sat by the window, staring out at the dark forest beyond. I thought about the day, about the moment when I couldn't find my flags, about the cold knot of fear that had settled in my chest. I'd been lucky. I'd been prepared, yes, but I'd also been lucky. If the wind had pulled down one of the flags, if I drifted just a little further off my path, things might have gone very differently. The next morning, I packed up, drove home, and spent the ride thinking about everything I'd learned. I didn't stop hiking. I never would, but I tightened up my routines, sharpened my awareness. I carried extra flagging tape. I marked more frequently. I checked my compass more often, and I reminded myself over and over that nature doesn't care how experienced you are. If you want to go off trail, go slow, flag as you go, and take the flags down on your way back. It's a simple trick, but sometimes simple things are what keep you alive. That's not just a pro tip, that's the truth. I've always loved the outdoors. Hiking has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I've seen plenty of wild things over the years. Mountain lions crouched low on a ridge, their eyes glinting. Bears lumbering through the underbrush, unaware or uncaring that I was nearby. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has ever rattled me like what I stumbled on deep in Northern California a few summers ago. It was supposed to be just another weekend trip. My friend Matt and I had planned it for weeks, a simple 2-night backpacking loop through a remote section of national forest. We'd picked the area because it wasn't heavily trafficked. We wanted peace and quiet, some time away from work. No cell service, no emails, no cars or chatter. Just trees, dirt, and sky. We left early Friday morning, packs loaded down with everything we'd need, tents, sleeping bags, food, water filters, the works. We parked the car at a small pullout where the dirt road ended and the trailhead began. There were no other cars, no signs of people, just a narrow trail cutting into the dense green. The first few hours were uneventful. We hiked steadily, stopping for water, taking in the scenery. The trees were tall and thick, the trail soft underfoot with fallen pine needles. The air smelled of sap and dry grass. Occasionally, we'd pass deer tracks or hear birds chattering above. By mid-afternoon, we'd climbed a good ways up, gaining elevation as the trail zigzagged toward a ridgeline. We stopped for a break, took off our packs, and sat on some flat rocks to eat. The sun was warm, but the breeze up high cooled us off. From the ridge, we could see the valley below, a wide, forested basin that stretched for miles. It looked untouched, wild, exactly the kind of place we wanted. That's where we were headed. We hoisted our packs again, followed the trail down off the ridge, and entered the valley. The trail became narrower, less maintained. We had to push through thick brush in some spots, step over fallen trees. It was somewhere near late afternoon, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock, when we crested a small hill and came down into a new section of the valley. At first, everything seemed normal. Trees, ferns, tall grass. But after about 20 yards, I noticed something strange. The ground looked disturbed, not just by animals or natural erosion, but worked. Flattened areas, little paths cutting through the brush where there shouldn't be any. I saw lengths of black hose snaking along the ground, half buried in the dirt. Matt saw it too. We both slowed down. We pushed forward a few more yards, and then it hit us all at once. The valley floor ahead wasn't just wild forest. It was covered, and I mean covered, in pot plants. Row after row, neatly organized, staked, irrigated. I saw blue plastic barrels set up as water reservoirs, camouflaged netting draped over sections of plants. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of plants spread out in every direction. It was an elaborate grow operation, hidden deep in national forest land. We both froze. There was no one visible, no movement, no voices. But that didn't mean no one was there. I felt the adrenaline kick in hard. My heart thudded in my chest. Here's the thing. It's one thing to stumble on wildlife, a bear, a cougar. They're dangerous, sure, but they're not looking for you. They don't care who you are. But stumbling into a grow operation like that, that's man-made danger. That's people who don't want to be found, people who are protecting something illegal, something worth a lot of money. And they might be watching. Matt and I exchanged a quick look. No words. We just both turned, slowly at first, then quicker, retracing our steps back up the hill. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept imagining someone stepping out from behind a tree, shouting at us, pointing a gun. I pictured us being chased, shot at, tied up. I knew how these things went. I'd read enough news stories to know these kinds of operations weren't run by casual hobbyists. We pushed faster, climbing hard back toward the ridge. My legs ached, my chest burned, but I didn't care. Every few minutes, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see figures emerging from the trees, running after us. We didn't stop until we were well past the ridge, back on a section of trail we recognized clearly, far from that valley. Only then did we pause, catch our breath, drink some water. We didn't say much, just shook our heads, packed up, and kept moving. That night, we made camp farther up the trail, well away from where we'd been. We set up the tents, cooked a quick meal, and sat in the dark, barely speaking. Every little sound in the forest, a twig snapping, a branch creaking, set me on edge. I kept imagining people tracking us, following us through the woods, making sure we weren't going to report what we saw. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd snap awake again, convinced I heard footsteps outside the tent. By first light, we were up, packed, and moving. We didn't stick to our original loop. Instead, we took the most direct route back to the car, skipping breakfast, just shoving granola bars into our mouths as we walked. The trail back seemed to stretch on forever. I kept checking behind us, scanning the trees, listening. My nerves were frayed, every muscle tight. Finally, after hours of hiking, we reached the car. I can't describe the feeling of relief when we saw it. Just sitting there in the dirt pullout, exactly where we left it. We threw our packs in the back, climbed in, locked the doors, and drove. We didn't relax until we were back on the main highway, miles away from those woods. We didn't tell anyone what we saw. We didn't report it. Part of me wanted to call the local authorities to let someone know about the illegal grow. But another part of me, the bigger part, just wanted to leave it behind, to pretend it never happened. It wasn't our land, it wasn't our business, and honestly, we were lucky to get out without trouble. I've thought about that trip a lot since then. I've hiked plenty more trails, gone on plenty more trips, but that experience left a mark. It taught me that the scariest thing in the woods isn't always the animals. It's what people are capable of when they think no one's watching. Now, when I hike in remote areas, I stay more alert. I watch for signs of human activity, not just wildlife. I move more cautiously, especially in places off the beaten path, because out there, you're on your own. There's no cell service, no help coming, no one who knows where you are except you. And if you stumble on something you're not supposed to see, you have to be ready to walk away, fast, and not look back. That's the truth of hiking in wild country. It's not just nature you need to respect. It's the people hiding inside it. I've done a lot of hiking in Alaska over the years. The thing about Alaska is that it humbles you. No matter how tough or prepared you think you are, the land, the animals, the sheer wildness, it all puts you in your place. Out there, you realize quickly that you're not in charge. There was one time, early on in my hiking life, when I found myself standing maybe 50 yards away from a grizzly bear and her cub. I was at a creekside, standing on some smooth stones near the water, the air cool and sharp, the smell of wet earth and moss filling my nose. The salmon run was in full swing, and the creek was alive with flashes of silver, the fish fighting their way upstream. I had been watching them for a while, crouched near the water, when I saw her. A big, healthy-looking grizzly, fur golden brown and shimmering in the sun, her big paws slapping into the water as she chased after the frantic salmon. At first, my body tensed up in shock. My mind raced through all the things you're supposed to do. Don't run, make yourself look big, back away slowly. But pretty quickly I realized she didn't even care about me. She had fish on the brain. Her cub, a little ball of dark brown fluff, was splashing around nearby, practicing its pounces. I remember taking a deep breath and feeling oddly calm. I raised my camera slowly, clicked a few pictures, and then began backing away one slow step at a time until I was well out of sight. That moment stuck with me, not because it was scary, it really wasn't, but because it showed me that fear isn't always tied to danger. No, real fear, the kind that shakes your bones and leaves you cold, came to me in a much more unexpected place. It was near Homer, Alaska, along a trail that, honestly, didn't even feel like a real trail. It was more like a paved bike path, the kind you'd expect to see winding through some suburban neighborhood. There were houses not far away, a road visible through the trees, and even the occasional distant hum of a car engine. It didn't feel wild like the backcountry did. Felt almost tame. I was hiking alone that day, something I often did. I liked the solitude, the rhythm of my footsteps, the chance to let my mind wander. The air was mild, a bit overcast, with clouds hanging low but not threatening rain. I had parked my car at a small pull-off near the start of the trail, a little gravel area big enough for maybe 4 or 5 cars. From there, the trail followed a gentle slope, weaving between birch and spruce trees, the ground dotted with low shrubs and thick green undergrowth. I wasn't expecting to see much wildlife. It just didn't feel remote enough. I was maybe 2 miles in when it happened. I was walking casually, not making much noise, eyes half on the trail and half on the plants around me, when suddenly, out of the woods maybe 20 or 30 yards ahead, a moose stepped onto the path. Not just any moose. A cow, full-grown, massive, towering, and right beside her, a calf. Now, if you've never seen a moose up close, it's hard to understand just how big they are. On paper, you can read the numbers 6-7 feet tall at the shoulder, up to 1,400 pounds, but none of that prepares you for standing near one. They are huge, towering over you, their long legs looking almost spindly but carrying enormous, muscle-packed bodies. And unlike deer, they don't flee at the sight of humans. They stand their ground. I froze instantly. My heart jumped into my throat, and for a moment I just stared. She was standing broadside across the path, her head turning slightly as she looked at me. Her big ears flicked, her nostrils flared. The calf stayed close to her, walking in little circles, occasionally nosing at her side. I could see my car. That's the part that still sticks with me. I could see it parked maybe 100 yards down the trail, but she was right between me and it. I didn't move. I didn't dare. Moose are not predators, but they are unpredictable. And a cow with a calf? That's one of the most dangerous animals you can meet. They can stomp you flat in seconds if they feel you're a threat. People don't always realize that moose kill more people in Alaska each year than bears do. They're fast, they're huge, and they get aggressive when they want to. For what felt like forever, we just stood there, me frozen, her watching, the calf occasionally shifting its little legs, trotting a few steps, then coming back. I remember how loud my heartbeat was. I remember the weird, tight feeling in my stomach, like I was holding my breath even when I wasn't. I remember the tiniest sounds around me, the rustle of leaves, the far-off call of a bird, the soft shifting of the calf's hooves on the trail. I kept hoping, praying silently, that she would just keep walking, just cross the path, move on, disappear back into the woods. But she didn't. She stopped at the edge of the trail, where the shrubs were tall and leafy, and began munching. The whole time, she kept one eye on me. I didn't dare back away. I didn't even dare turn my head. My legs were stiff, knees locked, hands slightly shaking. I felt absurdly vulnerable, standing there in plain sight, no cover, no place to go. I don't know exactly how long we stayed like that. In my memory, it felt like hours, but realistically, it was probably only a few minutes. Time stretches when you're afraid. Your mind loops, spinning out worst-case scenarios, imagining what you'll do if she charges. If she comes trotting down the trail at you, ears pinned back, hooves slamming into the dirt. I watched her ears closely. That's one of the signs you look for. If they pin their ears back, it means they're getting ready to charge. But her ears stayed mostly forward, occasionally flicking to the sides, twitching at flies. I shifted my weight slowly, just enough to keep my legs from cramping. She pulled at the shrubs, big mouth working through the branches, tearing off leaves and stems. The calf did the same, though clumsier, nibbling here and there, sometimes lifting its head to look at me. Finally, she began to move. She turned slightly, angled herself along the edge of the trail, and walked slowly into the trees on the far side. She didn't hurry. She didn't glance back. The calf followed right after, trotting to keep up, its little legs moving quickly to match her big strides. I waited another full minute, heart still pounding, before I even thought about moving. When I did, it was slow, careful, one step at a time, eyes darting to the trees where they had disappeared. I didn't run. I didn't want to risk startling them. I just walked, legs stiff, muscles sore, until I reached my car. Only when I closed the door behind me did I let out the breath I'd been holding. My hands were shaking. My shirt was damp with sweat. I sat there for a long time, just sitting, gripping the steering wheel, staring out the windshield. It wasn't the wild, backcountry hiking that got me. It wasn't the grizzlies or the remote mountain trails or the deep, silent forests. It was a suburban feeling bike path, a place where you almost forget you're in Alaska, where you start to let your guard down, where the wild sneaks right up and reminds you it's still there. That moment taught me something important. You can never take the wild for granted. It's not always the things you expect that will shake you to your core. Sometimes it's the quiet encounters, the ones that seem almost ordinary, that stay with you. Sometimes it's standing still, caught between a towering animal and the safety of your car, realizing just how small you really are. I've hiked a lot since then. I've seen bears, wolves, eagles, foxes. I've camped alone, crossed rivers, climbed mountains. But nothing has ever quite rattled me the way that moose did. And I think that's a good thing, because fear keeps you sharp. Fear reminds you that you're a guest out there, not the master. And in Alaska, that's a lesson you never want to forget. I've done a lot of solo backpacking over the years, and I've learned that no matter how many books you read, how many videos you watch, or how many photos you look at, nothing prepares you for the real experience, especially when it comes to the scale of things. Mountains, rivers, forests, cliffs, and animals. They're all bigger and more overwhelming when you're right there in front of them. You can't feel that from a TV screen. You can't get it from a photo. One moment in particular has stayed with me. I was backpacking alone in Alaska. It was late summer, early September, I think, when the air starts to cool and the nights get longer, but the weather still holds enough warmth that you can hike and camp without freezing. I had planned a 5-day loop, nothing too extreme, but far enough off the usual trails that I wouldn't run into many other people. That's how I liked it. Alone, just me and the land. The terrain was mixed, patches of forest, stretches of open tundra, and a few small lakes along the route. These weren't the big, sweeping lakes you see in the glossy magazines, but smaller, still bodies of water, often tucked into shallow depressions or cradled between low ridges. The kind of places where the surface lies like glass, broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish or the flutter of a bird skimming the water. It was on the third day that I found the lake. I had been hiking since early morning, covering maybe 10 or 12 miles, weaving my way through a mix of birch groves and open, scrubby hills. My shoulders ached under the weight of my pack, and my legs were stiff from the steady climb over uneven ground. I was looking for a good place to stop for the afternoon, somewhere near water, where I could set up camp, refill my bottles, maybe even rest my feet by the shore. I came over a small rise and saw it below me. A quiet, round lake, maybe a few hundred yards across, the water dark and still. The far side was lined with scattered trees, their leaves just starting to turn gold, while the near side was more open, with low grasses and a bit of rocky shoreline. I felt a little jolt of satisfaction. This was perfect. I picked my way down the slope carefully, testing each step, feeling the weight of my pack shift on my back. When I reached the shore, I shrugged off the pack and let it drop onto the grass with a satisfying thud. My shoulders tingled as the blood rushed back into them. I knelt by the water, scooped some into my bottle, ran a filter, and took a long drink. The water was cold and clean, better than anything you get from a tap. I rinsed my face, feeling the chill against my skin, and then sat back, breathing deeply. The place was quiet, not dead silent. There were the usual noises of the wild. A bird calling somewhere, the faint buzz of insects, the rustle of a light breeze through the grass. But no human sounds. No engines, no voices, no footsteps but my own. I sat there for a while, just letting myself soak it in. And then something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a log. A dark, heavy-looking shape near the far shore, half submerged, just a bit of it sticking up above the waterline. The light was odd, a little hazy, and I squinted, trying to make sense of it. Then the log moved. I froze. Slowly, the shape lifted. A head rose, long and horse-like, with big ears and a broad nose dripping water. A moose. I felt my breath hitch in my chest. I had seen moose before, but never like this, never from this angle, never this close to the edge of the world where it was just me and the animal, nothing between us. At first, it was just the head, poking up out of the water, dripping and gleaming in the dim light. Then, inch by inch, more of it appeared. The neck rising thick and long. The shoulders, breaking the surface, narrow but impossibly tall. The back, emerging like a dark island from the lake, water pouring down its flanks. It just kept coming. I remember thinking, half panicked, half stunned. How is there this much moose? Nature shows, photos, magazines. None of it prepares you for how massive these creatures really are. People think of them as big deer, but that's wrong. They're more like skinny elephants, not in weight maybe, but in sheer presence. Standing 7, sometimes 8 feet at the shoulder, with legs that look comically long but hold up a body the size of a small car. And there it was, hauling itself out of the lake, step by slow step, the water streaming off its fur, the wide hooves planting themselves firmly on the muddy shore. It was a cow, no antlers, but no less intimidating. I stayed completely still. I was maybe 100 yards away, which sounds like a lot, but when you're watching an animal that size, it feels like you're sharing the same small room. I kept low, not wanting to draw attention. Not that I thought she'd care. Moose aren't predators, they don't hunt you, but they're unpredictable. And if she decided she didn't like me there wasn't a whole lot I could do about it. The moose paused at the edge of the lake, standing tall, dripping, shaking out her head. Her ears flicked. She turned slightly, giving me a full profile. I could see the dark, wet fur clinging to her sides, the thick folds of skin under her throat, the long, gangly legs that seemed too thin to hold all that weight. Then, slowly, she began to move again. She walked up the bank, each step deliberate, slow, steady, as if the world belonged to her. She grazed briefly at some low shrubs, pulling at the leaves with her long, sensitive lips, then ambled along the shore, following the curve of the lake. I stayed rooted in place, heart pounding. At one point, she turned her head in my direction, and for a split second, her eyes locked on mine. There was no malice there, no threat, just a deep, ancient kind of indifference. A sense that I didn't matter, that I was just part of the background noise. And honestly, that made it even more humbling. After a while, she moved off into the trees, her huge body slipping between the trunks with surprising grace, the sound of her steps fading into the rustle of the woods. I let out a long, shaky breath. My shoulders were tight, my legs stiff. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been. I stayed by the shore a while longer, listening, making sure she was really gone, before finally turning back to my pack. I set up camp carefully that night. I found a spot a little farther from the lake, not wanting to risk any surprise visits. I made sure to hang my food well out of reach, even though moose aren't typically after human food. You never know in the wild. Better safe than sorry. Lying in my tent later, I thought about what I had seen. Not just the size of the animal, though that was part of it, but the presence. The way the moose moved through the land like it belonged there, like it had always been there, like it didn't even register my existence. It made me feel small. Not in a bad way, not weak or helpless, though I suppose in some ways I was, but small in the sense of being part of something bigger, older, more powerful than myself. Out there, in the wild, you're just another creature. I slept lightly that night, ears tuned to every crackle of leaves, every snap of a twig. I didn't hear the moose again, and by morning, the only sign that she'd been there was a set of deep, muddy tracks by the water's edge. I followed them briefly before packing up, marveling at the sheer size of the impressions. Big enough to swallow my entire boot. The rest of the trip was uneventful. I saw no more moose, no bears, no wolves, just the quiet, endless stretch of Alaska unfolding ahead of me. But that moment, standing by the lake, watching that massive animal rise from the water like some ancient spirit of the land, stayed with me long after I returned home. Even now, years later, when I look at photos or videos of moose, I remember how they don't really capture it. The size, the power, the silence. You can't photograph the feeling of your heart hammering in your chest when a creature that big turns its head and sees you. You can't record the way the air feels, heavy and still, when you're sharing space with something that could crush you without even noticing. That's the thing about hiking in places like Alaska. It teaches you humility. You can train, prepare, gear up with the best equipment, plan every detail, but in the end, you're just a visitor. The land doesn't care about you. The animals don't care about you. And if you're lucky, you walk away with a story, a memory, a reminder of your smallness. That moose, that lake, that quiet encounter, it reminded me why I go out there in the first place. Not to conquer anything, not to prove anything, but to be reminded of the scale of the world and my tiny place in it. And for that, I'm grateful. I've been hiking and backpacking for years, covering trails across the US, but some moments stick with you. Moments that come back in flashes when you're lying in bed at night or driving down an empty road. One of those moments happened to me in Montana, hiking alone in the backcountry just north of Yellowstone. I had planned a 4-day loop, circling through a mix of forest, meadows, and some rugged ridges. It wasn't meant to be anything extreme. I wasn't aiming for a record or looking to push limits. I just wanted to get away, breathe fresh air, feel that sense of quiet that only comes when you're far from roads, far from towns, far from people. I always check the wildlife warnings before I head out. Bears, mountain lions, sometimes wolves. You keep your food hung or in a bear canister. You stay alert. Make noise when you're moving through dense brush. You don't take stupid risks. I've never been reckless out there. I don't pretend the animals aren't there, but I don't fear them in a panicked way either. But moose? I'd never really thought much about them. I'd seen a few on previous hikes, usually from a distance, usually a quick glance and then they moved off. Big animals? Sure, but they were plant eaters. They weren't looking for a fight. I'd always figured as long as you didn't crowd them, you'd be fine. On the second day of my trip, I found out just how wrong that idea can be. The trail I was on wound through a wide valley, lined with clusters of aspen and spruce, with a cold, clear creek running through the middle. It was beautiful country, bright patches of sunlight flickering on the leaves, the sound of the water rushing over rocks, the soft give of the dirt under my boots. I was about 10 miles from the trailhead, well past where most casual hikers would go. I hadn't seen another person all day, and I didn't expect to. I was moving along at a steady pace, not in a hurry but not dawdling either, when I came around a bend in the trail and froze. About 50 yards ahead, standing right in the middle of the path, was a moose. Not just any moose. A bull, thick and dark and towering, with antlers that spread out like huge, jagged hands. I stopped dead, heart pounding. I knew enough to know you don't just walk up on a bull moose, especially not during rutting season. They're unpredictable, aggressive, and far more dangerous than most people think. This one hadn't seen me yet. It was facing the other way, head low, tearing at the shrubs along the edge of the trail. I considered backing away quietly, maybe circling wide through the trees. But the undergrowth was dense, and I wasn't sure I could get around without making noise or risking getting closer. So I waited. I stood there, barely breathing, watching the moose graze, hoping it would move off on its own. Minutes ticked by. Then the moose lifted its head, turned slightly, and froze. It had seen me. For a moment, neither of us moved. And that was when it hit me, hard and clear. This animal didn't have to think about me. It didn't have to calculate or weigh options or make smart decisions. It was too big to care, too big to die. I was a bug on the landscape to it, a thin, soft creature in nylon and fleece, a thing that could be stepped on or ignored at will. The moose's dark eyes fixed on me, and I felt a wave of cold sweep down my spine. Slowly, carefully, I began to back away. 1 step, 2. I kept my hands low, kept my body loose, kept my gaze averted. The moose snorted, a sharp, wet sound that echoed in the stillness. It stamped one broad hoof, tossing its head slightly, antlers flashing in the sun. I froze again. I'd always heard that moose aren't smart, not in the way predators are. They don't stalk or strategize. They're simple, blunt creatures. But when you're built like a truck on legs, you don't need to be clever. You don't need to figure things out when your body alone can smash through anything that annoys you. The moose took a step toward me. I felt a bolt of panic shoot through my chest. My mind scrambled for options. Climb a tree, none close enough. Sprint, it would outrun me in seconds. Stand still, hope it lost interest. I knew running was a bad idea. Prey runs, prey gets chased. So I held my ground, muscles tight, heart hammering so loud it felt like it might shake the trees. The moose moved again, snorting, lowering its massive head. And then, just as suddenly as it had fixated on me, it seemed to lose interest. It turned away, swinging its bulk back to the shrubs, tearing at the leaves with slow, powerful movements. I stood there for what felt like forever, legs shaking until finally, after what had to be 10 long minutes, the moose lumbered off the trail and disappeared into the trees. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding, a long, shaky exhale that left me dizzy. I backed away, step by careful step, until I was sure I was clear, then circled wide, picking my way through the undergrowth, watching every shadow, every branch, every flicker of movement. That night, I set up camp farther from the trail than I usually would, tucking myself into a thick stand of trees, trying to make myself small, invisible. Lying in my tent, staring at the thin nylon ceiling, I thought about what had happened. I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. In the backcountry, brains only get you so far. Sure, you can plan, you can prepare, you can learn all the survival tricks. But none of that changes the basic equation. Out there, you're the small thing, the soft thing. There are creatures on this earth that don't have to think about you because they're simply too big, too strong, too overwhelming to care. They don't need cleverness. They don't need caution. When you're too big to die, you can afford to be dumb. That moose, standing in the trail, towering over the brush, tossing its massive head, it didn't have to figure out whether I was a threat or not. It just had to exist, and I had to work around it. The next morning, I packed up early, moving quietly, watching the trees, the trail, the bends ahead. I didn't see the moose again. I finished the loop, made it back to the trailhead, drove out to the small town where I'd parked. But the feeling stayed with me. It stayed with me on later hikes, too, the knowledge that out there, in the wild, there are things that live by a different set of rules. Not everything is a predator. Not everything is a hunter. But some things, by sheer size and strength, exist beyond the usual balance. They don't have to be smart. They just have to be big enough. And when you meet one of those creatures, all you can do is step back, give space, and remember just how small you really are. Because out there, brains don't matter if you're not built to take a hit. Out there, the land belongs to the ones who are too big to die. And if you're lucky, you make it home. A little humbler, a little wiser, and still small.